Hey, David, can you hear us?
Just now. It had been quiet before.
It's good. We're well behaved.
Better than your kids, right?
All right, it is 6:05. This is Nathan McClellan. I think we're about ready to kick off our working session this evening, which is a joint working session for the Planning Commission and I believe the City Council with respect to updates to the general plan. So we will jump into that as our primary agenda item and we'll go from that point. So who do I turn it over to, Teresa?
So we have Lisa and Mark from Landscape Design, right? Landmark Design, sorry.
Lisa and Mark from Landmark
Oh,
Design.
Lisa Benson and Mark, I can't say your last name. Vlasic.
Welcome and thank you for providing this update for us tonight. We'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time this evening to come and give you an update on where we're at. We just wanted to present kind of some preliminary thoughts to you before we go to our committee and to the public for a workshop. So again, this document is to establish that vision for the city, you know, what you want to be, where you want to go, just letting everybody know the direction that you envision for your future and talking about maybe unique opportunities that we can capitalize on as part of that. Just a quick note, looking at the project timeframe, up to this point, the project's kind of been branded as Morgan 2050. But as we've talked more as a team and with staff, we feel more confident and like it's more appropriate to target that 2040 timeframe just because of the accuracy of some of the data, particularly the housing data. Our sub-consultants, Lewis Young Robertson and Birmingham, who are working on that housing element, just thought that that would be more appropriate and they feel more confident in the data that they can provide for that 2040 timeframe. So we'll be looking 20 years out into the future. Up to this point, we've had a lot of public input and you know, we have a survey, we've had the project website, which is still live and will be throughout the project. We also have had online scoping meetings and a number of focus groups. Notes from all of those are available on the project website if you feel like digging into any of it. But there's a lot there. And so we felt it was necessary to kind of filter or organize, I guess, what we were hearing from all of that data. And what we wanted to start with were some guiding principles that were based on all of that feedback. So we looked at 9 topics that came out of that. Community character, agricultural identity, environment and natural resources, smart growth, community services and amenities, transportation, housing, economic development, and parks and recreation. So looking at how to protect that rural, small town feel of the Morgan area, protecting agriculture, you know, for its value as livelihood, but also just that lifestyle and visual character that it provides, protecting the natural resources and environment, you know, water quality, air quality, all of those sorts of characteristics and some of those safety concerns as well, like wildfire, geology, those sorts of issues. Where growth and development can occur, making sure to do it right. And then balancing low taxes with the desire for those amenities. And that's always a challenging one for sure. Transportation and looking at how to improve the safety and connectivity through the community and providing for more user groups and just making sure that everybody has safe use, whatever mode they're into using. Providing a variety of housing options for both local growth and, you know, in that life cycle transition. And then also as part of that, maintaining agriculture and open space. So trying to find a balance there. As far as economics go, looking at a 2-pronged approach to economic development with a focus on serving local residents, but also kind of tapping into that tourism market, that visitor segment of the economy. And then providing that comprehensive network that connects all of your trails and unique amenities that you do have here, and providing facilities that help contribute to that healthy lifestyle that people value. And also, again, that will also encourage some of those visitors to explore some of those destinations that you have. Looking at the demographic conditions and future projections, Kate is going to jump in on this.
Great, thank you. So what we see here is we're displaying two different sources for population projections. The first one is the census. What I did is I took the historic growth rate of both Morgan City and Morgan County and took the growth rate that you have seen in the past and projected out. You can see the different decade points moving forward and where you would be if you continue going that way. And then we have the WFRC data, which they are a regional planning group, which they have their projections for where you will be in the future. So what we are going to go ahead and do at this point is we are using the census data as our historic backing. Like, this is where we are today. We're using their number for today, but we are going to be projecting to the WFRC TAS data to be where they are projecting you to be in 2040. Go ahead and go to the next page. And what you can see here is that this shows the population that you have today. Well, 2019, that's the most recent the census has, and that lime green, and then that outline in the dark green, that is where you were in 2010. So what you're seeing with the age distribution is that you haven't changed a whole lot, except for in the 5 to 14-year-old category, and then a little bit in 45 and up. But this shows us that you have a need for a variety of different lifestyle needs. Like you have the need to meet a lot of different lifestyles in the city. Let's go to the next one. Can we see the next slide maybe? There we go. So this is what the county looks like. They have a higher number in the preteen and teenager range, and then their numbers drop in the mid-career level of the group. So what we are assuming likely is driving this is that the mid-career individuals are possibly moving from the area to find career advancement or housing opportunities that better suit where they are in their life cycle. So let's go ahead and go to the next. What you can see here, you are the line with the square boxes on it. These are the household sizes through the years from 2010 to 2019. Your household size has jumped around quite a bit. You've had quite a bit of fluctuation. In general, you have been higher than the state and lower than Morgan County's household population. So we used your 2019 household population size of 3.24 to project how many housing units you'd need. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. Go to the next. And what we see here, you're the boxed line on this also. This shows the household incomes from the state, the county, and the city. You are significantly higher than the rest of the state, a little bit lower than the county, but you can see that there is a high per capita opportunity for spending that you have within the city. So that's benefit.
Okay, so diving into the kind of preliminary concept based on some of this information. This map shows the existing city boundary in this darker black line. The annexation boundaries are shown in this dashed line. And then there's another boundary beyond that. And what we're calling that right now is an urban services boundary. It might be an urban growth boundary, but it's kind of that flex zone where there might be a little bit of pressure for the city to provide some of the facilities, or there is the potential that maybe those areas will get annexed into the future at some time. So we want to be a little mindful of these areas as we move forward. And these areas might be adjusted a little bit. We're still working with staff to kind of fine tune some of this information. This is just still very preliminary. So the transportation concept here, Catherine, if you want to talk a little bit about this.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So this is, there are a set of adopted projects and plans for the area as part of the Morgan and, the regional planning organization. And so we've taken those plans and projects and actually have put them aside. These are kind of additional on top of those elements. These are things that we're proposing to help improve the safety in the area, as well as improve connectivity both within and out of Morgan City itself. So you don't have the same congestion and bottlenecking problems that have happened in the past. And so you can see we've got, there's a proposed, got like a frontage road. We've got, some connection over by the schools, some crossing road crossing measures, and a few things like that in this plan. And just some other opportunities to further improve the connectivity in the area.
And there will be more detail coming in this. There's still some additional layers of information to be added. And one thing I want to point out is that the idea behind this is to improve the issues with the dead end nature of Island Road. So we're trying to provide some ways to connect out both to, this potential frontage road that could run up to Stoddard, or, maybe a couple of options on, connecting out to Morgan Valley Drive. And these aren't exact alignments. These are just, kind of very conceptual thoughts, just that idea of connecting out. And obviously you've got your upcoming bridge here, the end of Young Street, and then some of these other crossings would require additional bridges. So we, recognize that impact and that expense. Going to the active transportation concept, we're looking at kind of a two-pronged approach here. And Catherine, maybe you want to talk more about this. I'll let you dive into this one.
Okay, yeah, excellent. So as Kate said, we've got a pretty large population under the driving age, and we've got as well as an older population as well in the area. And those are two audiences that we need to consider when it comes to transportation, in addition to not just people of driving age, but also those who come, hiking, recreation elements. And so these concepts are ways of connecting via, walking, biking, those sorts of elements that are just non-vehicular. So we've got a few places here that, again, we've got the crossing, safety crossing. We've got some trails that are, we have some trails that are kind of a short-term street side based, kind of the low-hanging fruit of fundable transportation projects. And then in addition, we've also got some adjacent or non-street side trails as well that are, a little bit more long-term, a little bit more in the future, and obviously would be a little bit more expensive to try and implement. And therefore, like I said, those are more long range. But again, we have some other elements here. The red are these kind of crash hotspots that we've seen in the data, as well as, again, the school crossing safety issues and the bottlenecking and congestion near the schools. And once again, the area for kind of increased connectivity for, again, walking, biking, being able to get through the different areas and from, to get from school to school.
And I think, we were just discussing this in the county meeting, and, the likelihood is that these street side trails may be all that you have for a really long time. We recognize that it's probably easier to do something with things within the existing right of way. And, these kind of separated trails right now, most of them are showing along waterways like the Weaver River or East Canyon Creek. And just like the Jordan River Trail in Salt Lake County, that vision took 50 years to realize. So it's something that you don't want to necessarily dismiss, and you can pick away at it, in little pieces when you can. But there were a lot of segments where you could be on the river and then all of a sudden you had to jump out in Midvale and hit a sidewalk, and, and those workarounds were there for years, but they just, in the last 2 or 3 years, kind of implemented the last chunk. And so it's fully connected through the county now, which is a big achievement. And so you have to maybe look to this short-term solution, which can be a good solution in itself, depending on how it's implemented with those street side trails. But then looking long-term at that, those kind of separated trails to provide a, kind of a more comfortable space for recreational cyclists and other users as well. So looking at the land use concept, we'll start in the city center here. So right now you have it's called the Central Business District, I believe. And we're recommending changing that designation to Historic Commercial District, just to kind of denote what that area really, more of the character, and we can get into some more of the details of what that will be like. Kind of piggybacking and transitioning out on the backside of that to a mixed use area to provide some transition between the, historic commercial and some of these residential uses. And then to the northwest is a flex district, and that could be light industrial, commercial with some residential as well. And there's a little overlay pattern here next to the river, and we're saying, maybe recreation oriented commercial, like some restaurants that are, focused on river users. Maybe there's a pull out right there, and you can pull up and, stop and have a bite to eat, that sort of thing. So kind of focusing that backside towards the river and tying that in with what the city already has going on with some of those parks and open space areas. And then looking at the residential densities, we're kind of bumping some of these areas to the next level. So what was low, we're bumping up to medium, and what was medium, let's see, it was the next lower category. What was rural, we're bumping up to low, and what was low, we're bumping up to medium, just with the idea of pushing some of the density within the centers. So when we're looking countywide, we're trying to focus the development in Morgan City and in Mountain Green, as those are kind of the two key areas where it makes the most sense to focus developments. You can help preserve some of that open space and that agricultural land. That's really key, for why people live here, and also that livelihood of agriculture. And it's a question: is this dense enough? Is it too dense? And Kate will get into some of the densities of these other areas in a slide that's coming up here. We can talk about that a little more. So we're showing some proposed land uses for those annexation areas. And then the idea is that within that urban service boundary, that would still be kind of fall under county, land use and zoning and all that, but maybe there's some sort of an agreement or an approach that needs to be a little more mindful. Maybe that develops according to city standards, so that if that area does get annexed, that process becomes a little easier. So Kate can jump in on the housing.
Yep. So with what we have existing, you have a population of 4,243. With the housing stock that was added in 2020, there was a potential for that amount to be increased to about 4,392. So that's about where we see your capacity for population at right now. It could be higher or lower, but that's about where we think your capacity is at. And that means, well, and you also have, as of the end of 2022, you either have 1,343 units built, or built plus with a building permit out. So you have some housing, and the next slide will show us where you're projected to be. So by 2040, the WFRC is projecting your population to be at about 9,118. And that means that by 2040, you will need an additional about 1,460 units. So this is the number of units that you would need if the housing size stayed the same. As you can see from your historic data, it's fluctuated quite a bit. So we felt leaving it there was a fairly justifiable decision to go with. So your household size 3.24 would be that number. Let's go to the next slide. We saw some of these density levels on that prior land use slide. The flex district not only is it residential, but there'll be some mixed use, light industrial, and then with the idea that possibly you could have some residential above, not a lot, maybe a floor, maybe two in some areas, not going crazy here on you. You have a historic feel, you have a feel in Morgan City. We don't want to change that feel, but that would be an option there. And then in the low density, like Lisa said, bumping it up a smidge to increase the amount of people that can be there, but not change the feel. So 1 to 5 units an acre would be what we'd see there. And then in some of those other commercial areas, seeing some possibly additional townhome construction or apartment construction occur. So these are the densities. What you can see here in this table is the acreage that would apply with that. So there's a lot happening in this table, and I want to go through it with you. What you can see is those different categories. You have the flex district, the low density, medium density, and then the mixed use. The next column shows you the range, the low to high range of units per acre that we're proposing. The next has the total acres for each of the different categories broken out. And then we have 2 different sections, a dispersed option and then a concentrated option. In the dispersed option, we're looking at what development would need to occur to add the additional units needed at the most dispersed of the recommended range, and how much land would be impacted by that. So if we look at that flex district, we're proposing of the 220 acres, about 53.4% of that would be impacted at the dispersed option, which means that 78 acres would be redeveloped or developed. In the concentrated, the more concentrated option, with that going from that 6 units an acre to that 15, you'd see about 19.1% of the acreage being affected. So instead of 78 acres being impacted, 28 acres. I was looking at what's on your agenda, and the townhouse project that you'll be looking at later, it's at about 8 units an acre, I believe, just so you can think about where that falls in that category. So what you can see here is with the dispersed option, you need to develop or redevelop about 390 acres, and with the more concentrated option, to reach that population projection, it would be about 140 acres. So just gives you some ebb and flow in different categories that could be adjusted to reach those population requirements that are coming in the future.
There's one slide I wanted to go back to as well, looking at the land use map I forgot to mention. So there's a hatched area over, a hatched pattern over these undeveloped areas. And the idea behind that is kind of a master planned community area or overlay, just something to encourage cluster development or kind of a little bit of a different development pattern in those areas, just to make, kind of make the best use possible of that space and maybe preserve some open space where it's possible. Just some thoughts as those areas continue to develop in the future. Looking at the recreation concept for the city. So you have your existing Riverside Park and some additional land that the city has acquired, and there's more on the south side of this. We still need to get that added in. But this is also proposing a regional, kind of a larger regional park here, just across the city boundary here, by the fairgrounds, and where those existing pickleball courts are located, and the possibility of a water park of some sort, maybe at this location, if it makes sense, just to tie some of those uses together. And then you have a couple of special use parks that we're showing just across the city boundary right now. The rifle range up there, the gun range, and maybe looking at the option, is there a way to add any additional uses that are logical to that land to kind of expand the options on that property. And then also this land here that the city owns right now as a potential kind of mountain bike park, bike park, mountain bike trails, those types of facilities. And one of the ideas that came out of a focus group with the mining and extraction industry was maybe negotiating an access point, through here to this area and maybe to the wildlife management area in exchange for, some changes in uses, maybe some allowed expansion into areas that are, not visible from the city or less visible, that sort of thing, where it makes sense. And it sounds like some of those talks might be underway or some of those discussions as a possibility. And then again, connecting these parks with these street side trails and potentially with these separated trails in the future. And then also tying in some of your other cultural and historic destinations, like some of these cool cemeteries that you have around the city and around the county, and even some of the newer ones that people are still using for recreation, and connecting those maybe someday with some of these canal trails or some of these other corridors that could tie that in. But just looking at how to add some of those elements, and then where it makes sense to add some interpretive signage that could interpret, history or environmental aspects of the city, or there's a lot of different things to look at from the recreation standpoint. And looking at economics. Kate.
Yeah. So we understand based on the feedback we've received that you want to keep that small town feel that you have. And that's one of the joys of coming to Morgan is what you're getting. Like you have that feel, and it's great. But with that, you always have the opportunity to expand a little bit, but keep that feel. So what we're recommending when it comes to economic development for you is to focus on that two-prong option, providing services for the residents of both the city and the county, and looking at the visitors that are coming for the day or maybe the weekend and what services they may need that you can provide so that they spend their money with you rather than with the surrounding counties. Some of those include a greater variety of restaurant options, and then outfitter, recreation outfitter type location businesses. Archery range just opened or is in the process of being constructed. So you have a lot of options there, just expanding that, looking at more of the local services that you need as people that live in the town and live in the city, making sure that you have the things you need: dry cleaner, place to see a doctor, dentist, those kind of options, and increasing their availability. And along with that, just recognizing that you have that vibe and you can market it and commercialize it. Like Lisa mentioned, you have the river that you front, and marketing to potential future river runners could be a great source of taxable sales for you in the future.
And I just want to run through a few points on the county concept. We don't want to go into as great of detail, but just give you a sense of what we're talking about for that. Again, some more transportation specific improvements for that area, expanding those trail networks and looking at those long range plans and seeing what they are proposing and tying in any additional projects to that. Looking generally at the county, again, the growth is intended in this concept to be focused in the Morgan City Center and Mountain Green Town Center. We have these other village centers that may have a little bit of a bump in density from what they're currently showing. We're kind of exploring that right now and seeing, how the community feels about that. And then obviously there are these major resort areas that impact the community with Snow Basin, Wasatch Peaks, East Canyon Resort, East Canyon State Park, and the new Lost Creek State Park. So there'll be the plan will definitely be looking at those and how they all tie together. Let's see. Kate, do you want to just touch on housing for the county overall real
Yeah.
quick?
So we have the existing and the future housing for the county also. They have about 12,500 people with the capacity for about 12,635 people. And then they have about 3,600 housing units that are existing. And if we look at the next slide, so they're projected to grow to about 20,000, and they'll need an additional 923 units by the year 2040. That does not include the housing units that are coming from you. If we look at the next slide, this will show you the breakdown. So they're 923 units, and you're about 1,460 units. And this is using those projections that were provided by the WFRC and where the growth is going to happen. It's going to be a little bit more concentrated within the city. You have the services, the infrastructure, and potentially it will grow more within the city rather than the county in the future. So this just, oh yeah, that has the densities. The densities are listed here for what we're seeing for the housing requirements within the county. We also gave them the dispersed and the concentrated options so that they can look at the different scales that can be considered. The village, you can see the top column row is the village center residential, and the bottom is that town center residential. So the town center residential is looking at Mountain Green specific, like that is Mountain Green. And the area that in old plans was designated as town center areas. That village center is looking at like Croydon, Peterson, those areas in the concentrated centers, and seeing the acreage that's there. And as Lisa mentioned, throwing out the potential for how would they feel about maybe having some of the density go there. But in general, in the county, you can see that that low density option or the rural residential is where a lot of the growth is being proposed, with the focus on more of a clustered development type consideration, keeping the development close together so that there are open swaths of land, so that they can potentially share some of the infrastructure if some kind of mechanical septic system or sewer system were to be constructed. They could have that, they could work together, like they could use it as a group towards the center of these village centers and not be spread and create sprawl throughout the entire valley. We're looking at that more of a concentrated cluster development happening here.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, you probably heard that we met with the county commission prior to this meeting, and we took an admittedly very conservative approach to the densities here, knowing the past history and concern about preserving the open feeling and also not overdeveloping the area. And we heard a resounding, I actually asked for almost hands up, that they are thinking that we need to substantially increase our densities on the centers, that in order to actually have a reasonable center where there's activity and where it creates something that attracts people, that they think that it could be double or triple what we're talking about here. So with that in mind, and then through that, they believe that could protect the rest of the land that won't need to develop to the greater levels and would be combined with some of the clustering ideas. So that was a surprise to us. I would say probably an interesting surprise that we're going to take into consideration, but it's just for you to know that we're looking for that sort of feedback with Morgan as well. Not that specific feedback, but whatever you care to give us, but that we're still at this sort of incubation period right now. And so this is the opportunity for you to let us know what you like and don't like, and we'll proceed.
And there were some technological difficulties, so I actually didn't hear that at the county meeting. I'm sorry I missed that. I would have commented on that as well. But thank you, Mark, for including that.
And then there's a lot more detail in this presentation. We'll get this out to you so you can look through it all. And I guess, Kate, if you want to touch on the economic development approach for the county.
Yeah. So with the county, you have Morgan City and then Mountain Green, and we want those to be the focal points for where the economic development occurs. That's where people are going to be coming and hopefully spending their dollars, and then leaving at the end of the day or after the weekend, after they've stayed in your lovely hotel. So we want that focus to be on those two areas, with the potential for the other village centers to have what they want when it comes to economic development, if that be a small restaurant, some kind of retail center. I'm thinking like a convenience store, something like that, to that whatever they feel will suit the needs of their residents. We're not recommending you throw a Costco in Peterson or something like that, but like, a convenience store, something small. That's what we see going in outside.
Yeah, recreation concept for the county is the same, just looking at, countywide, looking at these destinations and point of interest opportunities, ways to get people exploring and into some of these areas around. And the plan will also go into some detail on focus areas. There is an appendix to the county's general plan that has a lot of small area plans for these villages. And so what we've done is kind of combed through all of those and pulled all of those commonalities into these guiding principles and to some other data that kind of ties in with those guiding principles and falls under those. And so these focus area concepts will be pulling what's unique about each of these villages and kind of putting that forward. So, but we don't need to go into that detail for this meeting today. But just to give you an update on the direction that we're going. And this presentation towards the end, if you want to go through it, some of those slides are off. There are some ideas that Catherine has pulled together as far as types of transportation facilities that might work in a more rural setting like this. So if you want to go through some of those, there are some great ideas in here about ways for users to share the roadway, maybe in non-traditional ways, but still functional. So with that, are there any questions or comments?
Make sure you use your mic.
I'm listening to the presentation and I'm thinking about to the west of Layton and Roy, out in them little communities, and talking about these village centers. And I've just seen over the years how it started in a very compact thing and it seemed like country, and all of a sudden country just got gobbled up and gobbled up and gobbled up. Is there a way to control that retail commerce center more so than they're doing out there?
So you as well, zoning is what's going to limit what can and cannot occur. You have to remember that landowners do have the rights, have property rights, but zoning is an important factor in what happens and where it happens.
And one thing I could say, we do quite a bit of zoning work, and for these very special areas where you're trying to create a place, and you may want to explore eventually some different models than are currently in place. As you probably all know, that you have a Euclidean zoning ordinance. It's basically based on land use. And there are other methods out there that can help you achieve the kind of place that you're looking for. So they're form-based. They're trying to clearly establish the parameters of what a place is going, how it's going to function, what the relationship between the buildings and the parking and the open space, what the edges are like. So what you're concerned about, the creep, we call it, commercial creep, and all of a sudden what's commercial and what's residential, and you get conflict. All of that can be controlled significantly better through those sorts of tools. And they don't have to be big city tools. They tend to be, you see them throughout the Wasatch Front now. They're becoming sort of a go-to form for your commercial areas. And so I would say that that might be a goal in the plan, is to beef up your control mechanisms so that you end up getting what you want and you're not just spinning your wheels and losing what you have. So I'd say that that's something that could easily come after this plan is over. It probably should. There's a little bit more analysis of that.
Yeah, and we've talked about internally about maybe integrating some of those form-based elements into this, some of
Mhm.
those downtown areas.
Here, the role of the general plan is to give a vision. And we can give that vision, we can go into a lot of detail of that vision, but I think the key is to take it to the next level, because the zoning ordinance, in contrast, really controls what you can and can't do. And so that making that leap from the general plan to the ordinance, quite often what we see is that a lot of efforts put into the general plan and then it just stops, and then that languishes because that goal or that policy of making sure that your ordinances and codes are up to date to meet the vision, and that doesn't take place. And that's when you have the disconnect. And so I would say that that would be an important part, that this is just the first step, and to know that there's going to be other steps down the road that will be recommended in the plan.
Would you mind going back to the population projection slide right at the very beginning?
May I ask a question in conjunction with that? The 2040 proposals that you have, population, would that represent build out of the city, existing boundaries?
That's a good question. That's a Kate question.
I couldn't quite hear what was said. I just heard Mark say that it was a Kate question.
The projections for the 2040 population in Morgan City, that slide, I don't think that is that the slide. Anyway, it was like 10,000. I was curious, was that build out of Morgan City under the current city boundaries? Does that represent build out?
No, let me see if the TAS data has you going to build out. No, it definitely slows down around 2040, but it still continues to grow. And their data doesn't go much beyond 2050, but it's still increasing slightly as you look forward. But it's only about 100 to 200 additional people in the 10 years following 2040. So
I think that the other part of the question that he's asking more is, we have the current boundaries and the current annexation areas that we dashed in this future service area. Does that 2040 projection address, which boundary does it address?
it's addressing the current boundary, not
No annexation.
Correct.
So the question that I had with this data, if we look at what was used in the modeling later in the presentation, it was the TAS data, which is significantly higher, at least with respect to the city, than the census data to a significant and material degree. So one is almost 50% growth by 2040. The other is almost 100% growth by 2040. And I'm curious what's driving that discrepancy, because in the county, it's actually reversed where the census data is higher.
Yeah.
So I'm curious why we use the TAS data as the baseline. Is that to be more conservative, or what was the rationale?
So the census data is based on your historic growth, and that's a projection that I created based on your historic growth. I from the some of the conversations that we've had, there is a potential that you've had some development that's been halted or not halted, but decreased due to some population that hasn't occurred due to housing costs and possibly zoning, and that could be what has led to a slower increase in population historically than what may have occurred had it been allowed to happen without cost or zoning being in the way. So, and infrastructure, that's always a concern up with you guys. Well, Morgan County in general. So what we're seeing here is that could be, it's in more urban, I hate to call Morgan urban, but in more city centers compared to counties, you're seeing that increase with the TAS data a little bit more than in the unincorporated areas. So that could be playing into that. But the census data is based on the historic growth. TAS is more looking at transportation area data, and they're not necessarily looking at what historically has happened, but what they anticipate for the region will happen. So
it's a little bit more realistic at
Mhm.
some of the constraints of the zoning and land use constraints and transportation constraints.
Correct. It's
Okay.
a little bit more realistic. It is exactly what it is.
I ask a follow-up to that. I guess if the numbers aren't that far off, I'm wondering why we just don't use the TAS data so it's less confusing.
Yeah, I mean, we
For
can
both
definitely.
existing and for the projection, because it does seem a little bit inconsistent to use one for the base level and then switch over to the other for the projection.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it make sense to just choose the TAS, and maybe it's because the 2020 isn't, the numbers are a little off. I don't.
So the reason I did that is because the census data, they have a 5-year estimate that they put out, and that's their number. Like, well, the 2020, that's me growing it 1 year from their number. They're going to be releasing their 2020 data this month, but they have 2019 data that they've released. So that's pretty much where you are. That's why I used the census data, but you're not quite where the WFRC number is.
Maybe what we can do is,
but I can definitely change it.
assuming that we can get the 2020 census data, maybe we could reestablish the baseline data, just because I think this is a valid point here, to verify that 2020 population.
Yeah.
And project using the same method that Wasatch Front did forward, just to see where it would end up. So
Yep. And they usually release it in June. They haven't yet. I check it every day. So
we'll double check.
Yeah, once it gets updated, I'll change the census number.
Just if I can jump in, we have a couple more minutes before we need to start our general session. I have 2 pieces of feedback. Mr. Hopkin has a question. I'll try to make mine quick so that we can do that. If you'll advance to the land use slide for the city, this one, yep. The 2 pieces of feedback I have, and one of them's on our agenda for our general session tonight, which is mixed use and growing that. For me, I'd like to see that expanded even beyond what's captured in this vision. And I like in the research, that I'll talk a little bit about later, what I liked is 2 different types of mixed use zones. Maybe one's more of a neighborhood mixed use and one's a commercial mixed use. So I can talk more about that at some point, but just to capture the feedback, that's one thing that I think is a little light in this projection. The second thing that comes up for me, and part of the reason behind what we want to do with with the city and community feel and pedestrian friendly and all the components that you've articulated so well, there's not a focal point in the city. There's not a city center, a gathering place, some place that we can plan around and be this hub for these other uses that might develop around it. And I think from a general plan standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to have that type of focal point. Mr. Hopkins, go ahead.
I would agree with the chairman's request on those things. Just one quick question. Would you again tell me who TAS is and what that represents?
So TAS, that's the data that Wasatch Front Regional Council produces for the region. It's transit.
An acronym for what?
Let me double check what that is.
Traffic
So-
areas. It's a geographic area that's similar to a census tract that you basically, if you want more, you could, typically you take a look at a census tract that's used by the US Census, and if you need to divide it and get more detail, you break it down into smaller segments. That's what a traffic area zone is done, and it's called that because it's typically used and developed by traffic transportation engineers to understand the ebb and flow of traffic through a city.
Thank you.
We have just a couple of minutes left. Does anyone else want to ask a question or share a comment while we have Landmark with us? Well, Kate, Lisa, Mark, thank you all
Thank you.
for sharing this. It's a lot of work, a big project. We're excited for the future and what this means. Do you have any
Great
final
comments.
comments?
No, if you have more details, if you wouldn't mind shooting them off to us, we'd appreciate it.
Be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes till the general session, so we're just going to break for one moment. Good evening, everyone. It is June 15th, 7 p.m. here in the Morgan City offices. I'd like to welcome you out to the Morgan City Planning Commission meeting. And it's about the earliest we can have a commission meeting on a third Tuesday. So welcome to all of you. Those of you that are virtual, welcome to you. We have a few of us in the room, which hopefully you can see. We have microphones at every speaker's area. If for some reason, as we learn this technology, we forget to unmute, you're not going to hear us. Please let us know so that we can get that all captured and make sure that you're able to actively participate in this session tonight. I'd like to welcome anyone else that might be joining in the live YouTube stream that is taking place now. Thank you and welcome. We will jump into our agenda. We have two different sets of minutes to approve this time around from April 20th, as well as our last month's session on May 18th. And at this time, I'd entertain a motion from a member of the commission who's had a chance to review those minutes and approve them.
Mr. Chairman, which one do you want to do first?
We can do them at the same time if you want, or if you have specific things, start with the oldest first.
I move that we approve the minutes for the April 20th. No, I want to go back to the older one. I do have some corrections on April 20. So whatever, what?
Yeah, feel free to share what corrections you would propose.
On April 20, page on page 3 of 3. No, I've lost it. I'm sorry. Let me find it. This correction is on the May minutes on page 4 of 4. I think you meant to say in the second line where it says concern by stating mixed use is see different. Should that be seen differently?
Okay, so second paragraph, second line down, correction proposed to change C to seen. Does anyone else have any revisions or edits as you reviewed the minutes that you would like to have accommodated?
Hey, Nathan, I didn't get audio until just a second ago. It looked like the dates were the same on both sets of minutes. Was that noted yet?
Pardon, say that one more time, Jason.
This is
Or,
David.
David, that was David. I apologize.
It looks like the dates are the same for both sets of minutes, April 20th, but it appears there for two different meetings.
Yeah, that's a good correction. I noticed that as well. They are the correct minutes.
Right.
But they are the incorrect dates.
Yeah, okay. I didn't get the audio until just recently, so I wasn't sure if you already talked about it.
We have not. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Did you want to make a motion beyond that, Mr. Hopkins? Okay, so we have one minor revision on the table. Any other comments before we make a motion to approve the minutes?
Mr. Chair, yeah, the date for March 16th at the top of the page, it says, is that the confusion? April 20th?
No, both sets show April 20 date, but yet I think the second set of minutes is from May.
So the first set that has the pages 1 of 3 are the March minutes. Excuse me, the April minutes, and the 1 through 4 page is the May minutes.
Correct.
Yeah. With that understanding, would somebody make a motion to approve these minutes unless there's other revisions that need to be made?
With those corrections, I move that we approve both sets of minutes.
Mr. Hopkins made a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Wes. And any discussion before approving these minutes? For those of you that are virtual, I'm trying to watch so I can see your hands go up as we vote, but all in favor of approving the minutes as outlined. Let's see, you got Jim, Jason, Justin, I. Everyone in the room is favorable. It's unanimous. Thank you. We will jump into the main part of our agenda at this point. There are 2 items that we'll be going over. The first item is with respect to the Riverstone Townhomes. This is the final review for phases 3, 4, and 5. We do have a representative from the development on the Zoom meeting that we will give some time to in just a moment to share. We're looking to approve or send a positive or negative recommendation to the City Council for final approval. That is our task before us tonight. I'd like Mr. Apolloni to share just a little bit of the planning background with respect to these 3 phases. And if you wouldn't mind highlighting in particular, we've approved, or 1 and 2 has been approved, it's ongoing. I'm curious if there's anything that's substantial that's different with phases 3, 4, and 5 as outlined.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to. Under my review, there's nothing that's substantially different with the preliminary plat that was, or the preliminary review that was already reviewed by Planning Commission. These are just broken out in the separate phases of 3, 4, and 5, as you stated. This approval comes on the heels of, in January of 2020, the Planning Commission reviewed and approved the preliminary plat, and was then followed by the final plat approvals for phase 1 and phase 2 in March of 2020 and December of 2020. So these are the last 3 phases. Nothing stands out as significantly different. Staff is recommending a positive recommendation to the City Council to approve these plats.
Thank you for that. What would you say is the readiness? One of the things that we want to be doing as we forward recommendations to the City Council is ensure that there's not a open checklist of TBD items that need to be closed out. And I realize the city staff's working with the development on some of the engineering items, and it looks like most of those are complete. But just from staff's perspective, are there any items that are undone that we'd be sending a not quite finished project over to the City Council?
No, not at this state. So any items that need to be qualified through engineering or worked out through staff are standard items that we move through anyway without pending without waiting on a plat approval. So they are at a state where they're ready to move forward. They have everything on the plat that they need to have. And the engineer is recommending approval as well.
Thank you for that. Before we discuss this as a commission, I'd like to open it up for, I believe it's Cole Rouser with us. Cole, I don't know if you have anything to add to what's being requested here as the applicant and developer of this project. If you could share with us, that'd be helpful.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. This Zoom, you'd think I'd know how to run it by now, but really nothing much to add over what Weston just stated. We've been working hand in hand with the city and the staff there to get this everything worked out to meet the requirements that they've had, and I feel like we've done that, and we're ready. We've got phase 1 and 2 pretty well in the ground, and are looking forward to get going on this next phase. So
Thank you, Cole. Well, let's open this up for the commission, and let's address any discussion points or planning considerations as you've reviewed the packet in preparation for this meeting.
Cole, what kind of demand do you have for the units?
they've been in pretty high demand. So far, we haven't been offering anything as first, we haven't sold anything until it's just about ready to move into, just to make, as you guys know, the cost of everything is on the rise daily. But when we have released them, they're pretty much gone immediately. It's been kind of fun. There's a lot of young kids right here from Morgan that are occupying the majority of them. So it's been kind of fun to work with them and to see their excitement as we're able to get them in a home.
Do you have waiting lists?
We do have quite a few folks that we've taken a notification list that we will call and let them know when there's something available, and they seem to go pretty easily at that point.
Well, that's good for you. Thank you.
Yep.
And related to that, I guess I have a question for you as well. As you developed phases 1 and 2, and broke ground, started on the project, progressed, did you encounter anything that was maybe unforeseen at the time? When you last came before us as a commission, which I think was back in December, if I'm not mistaken. But so it's been 6 months. Has there been anything unforeseen that is noteworthy as we consider this project?
No, not really. As far as the development goes and the construction plans that were approved, everything's ran fairly smoothly, and has been right on target with those plans. We obviously the cost of everything has been probably our biggest challenge, just trying to keep costs in check so we can offer these at a favorable price.
That is a challenge. There's a property right across the street from this building that's gone up, and these prices are crazy to me.
Yeah.
And I know some of these demographics that you're targeting can feel the same thing. I'm curious, remind me what we decided with respect to that I think it was the 4th or 5th phase. I'm trying to look on the plat here, but I thought we had an area of open space that was originally going to be fenced in back by the river. Has that changed? Or is that no longer fenced in, or what? Am I making this up? Seems like I remember that conversation, but I couldn't find it in the drawings.
Yeah, so we had discussed back in the early stages that we had opted not to do the fence. We felt like that area down there is kind of an amenity to have access to the river. We have hopes of, we plan to do some landscaping down there and to make that kind of a place that those residents can go and enjoy. And we already have quite a few folks that are going and enjoying fishing right there on the Weber. So we had not planned to do a fence at this point.
Okay, that's helpful. So the drawing that's on the screen right now, that area behind units 72 to 81 is the area we're talking about, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Cole, I have a question for you on that. We, if I can remember, we talked about landscaping that, and it was, unless I'm not thinking straight, of it being kind of a water retention, and you talked about maybe sloping the banks down there, and eventually it could be grassed. And is it just going to be left natural there in that area?
I believe the plans stated that it would just kind of have a native seed mix. However, I do think that we feel like we want to make that more of an amenity. And so we kind of plan to do some things there. The pond has been built and everything's sloped in a manner that it could have sod and whatnot, grass placed on it to where people could use it and enjoy it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Jason.
at this point, if there's no more comments, I recommend that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council to approve the final plats of Riverstone Townhomes Phase 3, 4, and 5.
Thank you, Jason. We have a motion on the table. Is there a second for this motion? I see a 2 by Mr. Reese. Thank you, Justin. Any discussion on this motion before we take a vote? At this time, then, we will vote. All those in favor of the motion that as outlined by Mr. Ackett, please indicate so that I can see if you're virtual. Looks unanimous in the room and looks unanimous for those that are virtual. So motion passes to send a positive recommendation to the City Council for phases 3, 4, and 5. Thank you. And thanks, Cole, for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
The last agenda item for us today is our mixed use discussion. We had a significant amount of reference material in the packets. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review those so that we can have a robust conversation today. As Mr. Apolloni put this together, I'm assuming, I'm going to turn the time over to him to kind of set the context, and then we'll go into a discussion from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be brief because I think we have room for a lot of discussion here, but just to preface it, I provided 4 ordinances of mixed use codes that range the Wasatch Front: Logan, Provo, Bountiful, and Layton. They all have some excellent qualities to them. Not everything is going to apply to Morgan. They're, you look at Provo and it's, one of the things it spells out is that it's got a minimum height of 35 feet on one of their mixed use buildings. So that's something that, you got to take as a grain of salt as we're looking at mixed use and what we want to apply here. If you look at the Logan code, and this is the last comment I'll really make until there's further questions, and I'll let the commission discuss whatever they will, but looking at the Logan code, Landmark Design mentioned form-based code, and more you'll see hybrids of form-based code, and this Logan code starts exhibiting that. If you scroll through that code, you'll see images and how they're classifying their heights and what their setbacks are more based off transitions and buffers and what they want to see. They still are using Euclidean zoning here, so it is a little bit of a hybrid, but they are regulating more of the form of the buildings. And so that's a good one to look at in contrast to the other ones as well. But I will defer to the commission to discuss anything they want on this point.
Thank you. Before we give up the mic too quickly, just one question on, since those are terms that I first heard tonight, Euclidean architecture versus form-based zoning, I guess. What distinguishes those? What are the characteristics that distinguish a Euclidean concept from a form-based concept?
Yeah, your Euclidean zoning is what you will is your standard thought process through zoning. Zone A is separated from zone B. Zone A has X amount of uses and zone B has these other uses, and we don't necessarily mix the two. More and more we've started creating hybrids where that doesn't operate as much, but it is still a separation of uses. And generally the zoning code is a Euclidean zoning. Form-based code is just that. It focuses more on the form and the design and the functionality of the structure, the placement of where it is in context to other buildings, to the context of the neighborhood, to the city. And although you can regulate land uses out of there, it is more designed and focused on the use of the structure of the building, the context of what it looks like, than the land use itself.
Is the concept with that if the form is consistent, the appropriate use would follow?
Yeah.
Okay.
And more, that's why you'll end up seeing the hybrid and not just a strict form-based. In larger cities, you'll see the form-based code. So Miami is the first city to really adopt a new form-based code. And that's on such a broad scale, it's easy for them to not regulate the land uses as much. They already have a very strong established city, but we'd still want to look and be careful and thoughtful about uses, but we could do it in more of a broad context.
Thank you. So we have about 40 pages of material from these 4 jurisdictions that have been provided in the packet, in addition to some of the individual research that hopefully we've all had a chance to do between last month and tonight's session. So let's at this point open it up for those in attendance to comment and share based on your study of these jurisdictional ordinances that we've read, as well as anything else you'd like to add about mixed use.
Mr. Chair, I have a more of a general statement that may help form some of the questions we have. If we look at where we are in Morgan right now on the economic development side of things and these mixed use opportunities, as well as just any commercial industrial opportunities, I think part of our question and a way to frame this is, are we looking to put something in place where we build it and they will come, or are we doing something where we make it easier for somebody to come and then build it. Because I think we need to be realistic with ourselves here in Morgan on how many businesses are actually looking to come in and do business in Morgan and what types of businesses those are. So as we look at setting up a standard with how we look at this, I think that's going to matter.
Yeah, it's a great comment. Thank you, Mr. Reese, for that. I can share my opinion since this is a discussion. From my standpoint, I like the idea of making it easy for those that are coming in to accommodate the desired attributes that we're trying to encourage here in the city, whatever those attributes might be. And so if we can make it easy through the ordinance, in other words, let's make it easy versus just building infrastructure and not having anyone come to fill that. Other thoughts on mixed use?
Mr. Chair, something I've thought a lot about on this mixed use and what Justin has said ties into it. Everyone knows that business is all about dollars and how many you're going to put in and how many you're going to get out of it. And I think that we walk a really fine line with the making it easy. And what I've been thinking a lot and going around and looking at different places that are mixed use, and I would just a discussion for this body is, do we want to change ordinance or just leave it be where a person can buy an existing home in a mixed use area and just kind of makeshift turn it into a business and maybe live in the basement or whatever it is? Or do we want to maybe explore the idea is if you're going to put a business in a residential home, existing home, that we have certain criteria that we have to do as far as not only parking, but the way the structure looks, those type of things. Because I've went around and I've seen some places that has mixed use and you can tell, and it's maybe just a offshoot in an older part of town, and there's a bunch of older homes that they're kind of just trying to put businesses in those homes and maybe living in the basement. And it's not very attractive, and it doesn't to have. I guess I'd ask Weston, is that something as we're building out and building this mixed use zone, is that something that we can implement? Say, just going down State Street and just take a couple of those homes. Can we put something in there if somebody is going to, of course, the original owner, you can't make them probably do that, but if somebody buys it to put a business in there, can we write it so that you have to change it so it looks appealing? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. So just to clarify as well, so you're also talking about the difference between having areas that are already zoned mixed use and how they operate it versus it's just zoned either commercial and residential and there's a house on it and they're going to do with it whatever the zone fits into the category, and we would hope that they would convert it to a mixed use. Is that?
Well, let's just say that we take State Street and we go down, like Nate mentioned earlier, to expand that mixed use and take it down State Street. And there's a lot of existing homes on State Street, right? And let's say we take it down to Young Street. As one business builds off of another business, and are we going to want to leave the existing structure there the way it is and just put a sign up that we have a bakery here and we're living in the basement type of thing? Or we write up an ordinance that if it's going to be a mixed use, that here's the criteria on changing the face of the building itself.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things you can put in place. So you are right that given the home, there's a residential home and potentially a commercial zone, for the, as an example. They will have rights to operate commercially, but they still have to meet the ordinance. And so whatever that ordinance is, parking ordinances, and there can be thresholds set if they have to convert the building up to X amount of dollars. The city can require certain types of improvements be put back in. And so, yeah, you can do that. We can also in the general plan state that that area is meant for mixed use. And so as developers come in and they say, I want to redo this property from residential to this other thing, we can lean on the general plan and say, the general plan calls out mixed use. That's what this area is intended for. So your vision needs to fit within the parameters of the general plan.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
And related to that, part of the question, and it might have been what you were asking too, Justin, is if it's a pure mixed use zone, so somebody comes in, does that mean, or we mandate that that has to be mixed use so that that will start the game and everyone else will follow? Or if it's mixed use in addition to, so you can choose one or the other or both, we could see low adoption for mixed use and this vision may not happen. And so that's one thing that I think is unresolved. Last time you shared a presentation that outlined some of the goals of mixed use. And one of the ones that stood out to me was that pedestrian kind of feel. And so to me, I made a comment in the work session with the landmark design about the two different types of mixed use zones that seemed to make sense as I was reading through this and looking up some of the research. And one of those was commercial mixed use, which for me feels a little bit more like what commercial street is, where you've got storefronts right up to the sidewalk. It feels very pedestrian or can be, residential, either behind or on top or what have you, in a mix of retail and restaurant and those kinds of things. To me, that's that traditional mixed use. I think that type of commercial mixed use fits well on Commercial Street. I wouldn't mind seeing it down State Street from Commercial Street to Young Street. But then some of the offshoots where we have, more of a residential feel, that neighborhood, that neighborhood mixed use to me is something that I'd like to entertain, where you might have the corner, the corner retail at the front of an intersection or a neighborhood as you go in, and even though it's a residential neighborhood, and so that's different than the pedestrian orientation of what you might have in the downtown, if you will. But for me, I like that component. I like the idea if we can get a sense of community and people out of their houses and interacting and walking and being part of, the energy of the city. To me, that's what a good, healthy mixed use can accomplish. And it's not everyone's vision, but as I think about it, that's what resonates with me.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Please.
I was in Provo recently and they have significant growth going right now. They've got a handful of buildings that are mixed use and that fit the character of Provo and how it's growing. And it was pretty interesting to see. I used to live there years ago and they have quite a large housing structure, and the whole entire floor is commercial. And it just, because of the size of this commercial building, it just has never been able to support the commercial. And so we have to be very thoughtful about what we accept. And their new mixed use buildings they're putting in, they're sections of commercial on the ground floor. And so it might be to the point that each project is a little different. If you look at some of these codes, there's at least two of them that will state we want to see commercial on the ground floor, but there is room to have approvals of not having commercial on the ground floor based on a review of the surrounding area. And that would come into context of putting a building next to already zoned and actively used commercial spaces. And so there is that balance. And I don't think we're at the point where we would over commercial, put in too much commercial space, but we just want to make sure that we balance that threshold, that we're not requiring too much out of developers.
Make it easy.
Yep.
Mr. London, could you grab a mic and talk into it? I can bring it to you.
So if you look at State Street right now, where we're zoned commercial, and maybe to Wes's point, you take a look at mixed use. I can't, in my mind, I would think that someone would probably want to take the existing home and somehow maybe perhaps want to put a business in the existing residential home. Think of, what's it called? Shirts to a T. Paddocks, that's an existing residential home that now is mixed use. And I guess in my mind, I see probably that happening in more along State Street, where somebody isn't going to buy the property, tear the house down and put in a mixed use, but just maybe convert that existing home into a mixed use of some sort. And of course, there's things that will have to be conformed to in order to do that. A huge one is parking. You're not going to put something in there that's going to have 15 parking spaces. So I think there's a lot of considerations to look at when you come to mixed use. And it's a little different than City Creek and Salt Lake, where you have the mall, City Creek Mall, and then you have all the apartments, high-rise apartments, right side by side. But anyway, just a thought on State Street that, because it is obviously right now zone commercial. So I don't know if that's kind of what you were talking about, Wes, or.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to make is, when I said dollars going in, dollars going out, the way property is now, if a person comes in and decides to buy one of them existing homes on State Street, right? That's a pretty big investment. And Nate brought up the point, it's Morgan and what's going to draw what business. It's not really feasible for quite some time that somebody's going to buy a home at $400,000 or $500,000, tear it down and build a $500,000 freestanding structure with apartments on the top. It'd probably be $1 million or $2 million. And so to Nate's point, a compromise, but to make it so that it is appealing, it looks like a business, and we have some real structure as far as the ordinances on, okay, if you're going to use an existing structure, here's what you have to do, what Weston said, change the front, the certain height of the roof, whatever it is. Because I've went around and seen some places that business are running. And you can tell it's an old home, it still has a pitched roof, and it just not very appealing, And so if we talk about, are we trying to attract people here, or why are we changing this to mixed use looking forward? And so I think that's something that we really need to think about in the future of the existing structures. And if somebody's going to do that, what's the criteria to put a business in it?
And I'd be curious what your opinion is. So we have an example of that. I know there's several, but the one that stands out is it's across from Ridley's and Bingham's right there, that insurance building that was a home and is now, or at least it was for a time, a business. Tell me how that fits in with what you're talking about. Did they do it right? Or would you like to see, codified a way to make that look different?
See, that's a perfect one, because to me, it still just looks like an old house that somebody tries to stick a business in the front of it. And I don't think when it comes down to the investment and ROI on it, that we make it so difficult for a business owner to have to really dramatically do it. But I think it would be advantageous for the whole city if those structures look like businesses instead of just old homes that somebody stuck a business in. And it would draw more businesses. You know, if we started it out, then the person that bought the next house next to it would expand on that, I think. I just think it's just get it started in the right way. And you can't, I don't think you can go back and force people until a new business or a new person buys it. But it's just a thought that I've had as I've went around and looked at these mixed use. There's some older parts of town that you could tell they weren't mixed use. They didn't have the living on the top, and they've done it nicely. But the places that I see kind of are, I guess the word I'm looking, they've just stagnated. There's nothing going on. It's just, they've just maintained that residential home with the business in the front of it. And I think if we're going to build State Street, I think we really would do ourselves a favor by examining how to help that along and still not kill the business owner.
Thank you.
Nathan, I've got a comment.
Go ahead.
And this kind of goes maybe.
David, sorry, I looked at the wrong person. Let's have Jason Ackett go first, and then you can go.
Certainly.
That's okay. Go ahead, David. I'll go after you.
Let's arm wrestle. This kind of touches on Justin's comment earlier, and even maybe goes back to our prior meeting where George said he had a hard time visioning where maybe a mixed use would be in the city. But I guess a question that could be posed is, what problem are we trying to solve? I'm not sure that, and maybe that ought to be in the back of our minds as the discussion, moves forward.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll comment, and then Jason, you can jump back in. From my standpoint, it comes back to what Mr. Apolloni shared last month in the presentation. Some of those reasons for mixed use, and I don't remember all of them. I don't know if you have that handy that you could refresh our memory, but the one that keeps coming back to me is that pedestrian friendly kind of component. How pedestrian friendly are we making the city? Is this a place where people want to be and spend time and money, but spend time and congregate and build community together? To me, that's part of the what we're can solve for. It's not all of it. There's the other components that he's going to pull up for us. But to me, those are the reasons that we're pursuing this, as opposed to, if it's not broken, why try to fix it? Which is a good question to ask.
Well, and there's a lot of benefits that come from mixed use planning for sure. I mean, that's why cities do it. But I mean, urban planning 101 will tell you there's really 3 prerequisites that need to be in place for mixed use planning to be, successful: employment, population, and consumer spending. I'm not sure we're there yet. Are there other avenues, and those goals that you're just talking about there are certainly worthy, and we'd all recognize those as being lofty. But would there be other ways of coming about or reaching them? In other words, I think we need to weigh the negatives that could happen with mixed use planning, as well as the benefits, and say, are we ready for that?
Yeah, it's a great comment. In your mind, what would some of those negatives be?
I shared a example, I think a couple of meetings ago, where a town, I think it was in North or South Dakota, said, okay, here's an area that we designate as a mixed use. Well, residential housing was one of the uses of the mixed use. And as it turns out, and back to my concept of, economic hand playing its his position. The developers came in and built subdivisions, and the mixed use area ended up being mostly residential. Big box came in and said, at the end of that residential area, we want to put our, warehouse or our Sam's Club or whatever in. Now you've got a problem on your hand because, yeah, it's allowed zoning wise, but the neighborhood is up in arms because, they've got their residential, their residences and subdivisions already built.
Yeah, that's a good example. Reinforces kind of what I was thinking of too. It wasn't my idea, but what I read about, which was the commercial mixed use as distinguished from a neighborhood mixed use type of zone where, those would be separate and distinct. Okay, Mr. Hackett, you've been patient. Go, David.
Yeah, maybe,
cutting you
so
off. Go ahead and finish, and then we'll go to Jason.
yeah. So what you're saying is that maybe the mixed use could be limited so that it fits what we're trying to do, rather than throwing everything into one hat.
That's what I'm leaning towards.
Yeah,
as I learn more about it.
I mean, considering all of the discussion, that may make sense. Just limiting the mixed use then.
Jason, you're up.
Thank you. One of my thoughts were, I'd like to see something. I haven't found any examples where a bunch of old houses turned commercial is visually very appealing. It feels like over time those homes end up just being run down or not really ideal businesses, and then eventually the area gets bad enough where it makes sense for them to be torn down and the land gets redone. You see a lot of that on Riverdale Road's a great example over the past 30 years. What I wonder is if we could somehow empower that, if we could craft some kind of code that that would be friendly to a developer, where a developer could take a couple homes that aren't ideal, and the investment could be made up with a residential and commercial mix. I know of one where I bought some rentals in North Salt Lake on Orchard Boulevard, and they took 2 old homes with some land, and they built 26 townhomes there, and it made sense for the builders to absorb that initial cost because they'd make it up in the long run with the townhomes. And if we could craft a code, because I feel like the residential is going to help drive the commercial. And so my thoughts are, in this example, what if it were feasible for a builder to buy 2 homes, knock the homes down, build enough residential to where it makes up for that cost, and then the code forces them to have some kind of commercial element there. And I feel like some of the things we lack is we don't have a great place. We don't have a lot of buildings or space in a lot of areas for the type of things we just heard, for new restaurants to come in, for new professional services to come in. And so I almost feel like if we could incentivize, if the residential model were there that forced the commercial to come, even if the commercial were vacant for a moment, it would then let the entrepreneurs in the community say, oh, look, there's a building. Maybe I'll put in a Hug Hess restaurant there. Maybe I'll put in something there. So I just wondered, that was kind of my take, is I wonder if we could somehow craft a code that would allow those older homes to be, maybe it's a minimum size requirement or minimum mix requirement that the residential is appealing enough and forces the commercial, then the commercial can be backfilled later.
Thank you, Jason. I wanted to turn the time back over to Mr. Apolloni, if you might refresh our memories on what those benefits were.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly because I can't find that presentation. It must be saved on a hard drive that I don't have with me. But in generally, what we talked about is, mixed use, its purpose and goal is really to create a live, work, shop, play environment. And you may not hit all those markers, But some people are going to hit more than others. But to create an environment that is pedestrian focused, that supports your commercial, your existing commercial, that supports the growth of new commercial, and supports the residential, existing residential neighborhood, and your recreational system that, we just talked about, one that's existing and two that was in the general plan. One of the things that the general plan that they presented in the preliminaries was how did they state it? I think it was residential focused, or a recreation focused mixed use, or recreation focused residential. It lends itself to a more cohesive environment versus what we have been operating under, which is a very Euclidean separated uses environment.
Thank you. And that inclusive piece, I think, is a key benefit. I'm also hearing that a lot of those benefits are dependent on a certain density. In other words, if we're spread out, by default, that pedestrian goal can't be accomplished. And so that density matters and isn't a bad thing in this environment. It doesn't mean it's becoming Manhattan, but that's a pretty well mixed use kind of environment, and there's clearly density. And so on a Morgan scale, what does that mean? And it feels like same idea. I know I'm a dog with a bone on this, but coming back to the two different types of mixed uses that I'm thinking about, if it's a neighborhood mixed use, it'd be a lower density. And if it's a commercial mixed use, it'd be a higher density in some of those uses, is a thought. Mr. Hopkins, I saw your hand up.
Weston just said something that I've always, I guess, pretty much had in my mind when we start talking about mixed use, and that is pedestrian capabilities.
There's no audio.
It's green.
It's green.
Let's talk into it.
Is that better? Mixed use to me means pedestrian traffic. And maybe that comes from some of the places I've lived in the world. But when I see State Street at any time from 7 o'clock in the morning until after school starts on a school day, it's not particularly a place I'd want to be walking around. And the same thing at night coming home. As the county continues to subdivide and put more people in Porterville, that's only going to get worse. I can't see it being too terribly appealing to businesses, Wes, where parking and fast travel seems to me to interrupt that kind of thing. And so I've been looking around town, wondering where to put something like this. I don't know that I have any good ideas. I'm still looking. But mixed use to me means pedestrian traffic. And I don't think, other than maybe Mr. and Mrs. London, who walks up and down State Street twice a day, it belongs, it's very appealing for the pedestrian.
Mr. Chair, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Woods.
Listening to this, some great comments made me think when we're laying this out, and David and Jay and what George has said and Weston, is if the city could incentivize to compact that, to help out what George is saying, to maybe there's a section of State Street half of a block, 3/4 of a block, that the city will say, hey, if you want to come in here, this is zoned, this area, we're going to give you, like every city does, some tax breaks, whatever it is, to put that in there to make it a little bit more dense, and that it will slow down that area. But for where Morgan is now, if we go from the freeway to Young Street down State Street, it's going to be years and years of little places of different businesses if they decide to come here. So that was a great idea to like condense that down, make it more closer together, so to speak, and then have the flexibility of, okay, it's still open for mixed use, but we want it, we're going to direct it to this one area. Just a thought.
Thank you for that thought. I captured a couple of things from that. One, in this discussion, we're looking at the where. That's part of what we were tasked to do in our homework, is where in Morgan does it make sense for mixed use to occur? Does it go all through the commercial areas or concentrated, as you had outlined? And that makes a lot of sense, particularly where State Street has large setbacks for those existing operations, versus either unbuilt areas or commercial street that does not have those setbacks. And some of the unbuilt areas could be what we saw in the general plan proposal or earlier this evening. So I like that concept of concentrating where we might be able to get some of that now in State Street, but maybe not the whole corridor. Good comment. What else?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Justin was going to jump in, and then Teresa. Go ahead, Justin.
Back to the State Street. I mean, I know we've all kind of honed in on that one because that's where we talk about the commercial development. But in terms of the infrastructure of State Street itself, how much control do we as a city have if we were, say we did have a great option to put mixed use and more commercial down there, but keeping in mind exactly what Mr. Hopkins said on slowing the traffic down. I mean, I have family and friends that I've tried to pull out onto State Street. Backing out is very precarious. Is there any plan in the future where State Street is either expanded, widened, or reconfigured to allow for better traffic flow on and off?
Does anyone have an answer to that question? I don't know what UDOT's got in mind, Mr. London's.
Mr.
It is a UDOT
Chair.
thing. Go ahead.
We have yearly meetings that I go to with the city, with UDOT, where they talk about plans and future and traffic studies and roundabouts and all that stuff. I don't see anything like that in the next 20 years from what I've gathered out of those meetings. I think anything
like that.
Multi-lane or just traffic lights or anything like, those type of things, widening, major improvements from my experience with the UDOT meetings we've been to.
Any thought a couple of years ago, the center lane was added for part of that stretch, at least up to the bridge by Shirts to a T. And then after the bridge, the turn lane goes away, but there's enough width in the road, you could repaint the lines. Does UDOT have any plans to extend the center turn lane through that corridor?
I know in 2 years they're scheduled to do chip seals and do some maintenance, but no one has ever said if they have any intention of changing striping or doing anything different with that. No one's ever said. I have been kind of led to believe it's just going to be put back as is.
And then just to add, UDOT has been going through a transformation where they're not just a transportation. Now they've labeled themselves, just not roads, but all things transportation. So they're a lot more open to community focus. So we're across all of Utah, right? How many towns have State Street as their main street? A lot of them. A lot of them have just been built off of a state road. And for years and years, they view it as just getting people through. That's a snow storage lane. That's not parking. You know, I dealt with this in a previous city where we had to have year-long traffic studies just to say, we're just asking for you to do the speed limit change, right? Like slow them down coming off of that hill. And it was ridiculous that we didn't have more influence. I think that mentality is now changing. So the better idea that we get what we want, the more open they're going to be, but they're not just going to magically do anything. But I do think that there's avenues that we can, you know, where it's involves striping or street lighting and on and offs, you know, look and feel type things. We have a lot more options that we didn't have before, but we come up with that concept first, and I think there's more willingness to listen and adapt. They're being more sensitive, trail crossings, you know, that sort of thing. So
Thank you. Mr. Hopkins.
I have one more comment, and it could very well be very dangerous to make. But if I've gotten anything out of this set of meetings tonight, it is this, I think, this fact. And that is whatever planning and zoning decisions we make, we have got to come up with some enforcement of land use within the city and maybe even within the county. As to, we heard earlier that there's areas within the city that could be used as recreation. Certainly, I think that is important and should happen. But in order for that to occur and have a place to recreate besides the area around the fairgrounds and the old Virgil Stewart farm, we have got to be able to preserve some of these other areas, and that takes the ability of certain landowners not to have the flexibility that they would normally want. But if we are going to have some of the things that we need, then maybe our codes need to be changed and make some hard decisions so that we can have what we need to have in 2050 versus what we don't need in 2025.
can I add to that?
Please.
So that was one of the outcomes from that presentation is you saw the population projection for 2040, but most of that happens in the next 10 to 15 years, right? And then it levels off. For whatever reason, I didn't ask. I don't know, you know, where that came from, but I thought that was interesting that we're doing this now, which seems more timely, you know, the general plan and looking at some of these zoning options, because if we essentially almost double our population in the near term, because a lot of what we talk about is like, well, we're not going to see that for however many years, but I'm not sure that that's the reality. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, things have, for example, that whole flex space right now, that where they said that flex district or whatever, that's a huge amount of property that's never developed. And some people say it's not going to develop for years, but one entity quits farming or decides that our decisions are like, we've been doing a lot of 10 acre developments at a time, but there's a couple of property owners on other sides of town that somebody dies or they change their use and they decide it's time to sell, then that changes the dynamics in a hurry for us. And so I think whatever it is that we do, I think that that's timely now. So, and my other comment, my last comment, sorry, I've listened to a lot of the concerns on State Street, and it's interesting that a lot of those concerns are because of what we currently have, not necessarily because of what mixed use we may or may not come up with or where we might place that. That's because it's that transition from residential to commercial, and we don't allow any other options. And so my comment about mixed use as an option isn't necessarily just open the door and say any mixed use either or works, but there is an opportunity to make the best use of space. So project by project, where it makes sense to, like that little rezone that we did with Wardell's, where there's a house in the front and RM15 in the back, and we struggled with that line. And I don't know, but there's other properties with that same situation. And if we say, hey, there's a mixed use opportunity here, pull the traffic clear off of the street and redevelop it in a way that includes a little bit of housing, like what Jay was talking about, then you might get a different proposal instead of either or. And that's the, leave an old house. And I don't know, but a couple of the developments I have or people that have looked, it is the housing that's driving the commercial. It takes numbers, it takes people, but a couple of them that have looked at office space or something like that, it's just too risky, right? But the comment that I've heard probably 4 different times in some of these different areas is if I knew I could do X amount of apartments, that makes it doable, and I would do a commercial building, over by the bowling alley, behind Commercial Street, behind North Front. But as is, if it's strictly commercial, it's not happening. And if it's strictly apartments, we probably don't want it.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest, right? That's the challenge. It's like, how many more just apartments do we approve? And so just having an option, I think, is a good opportunity for us.
And what I'm hearing as well is some of the incentive to encourage that. Sure.
So, Ty, if what I'm hearing is you're saying that we could have a mixed use ordinance that would allow us to keep that in, say, our back pocket, and when the economic motivator was there, we could use that is that what you're talking about, rather than just opening something up to say, here's mixed use and hope that it'll happen the way we want it to?
Yeah, so like an overlay zone where it's conditional or whatever you put on it. So you meet these criterias and now it's an option. But if we don't get X, Y, and Z out of it, you take it through the process and you have a lot of control as a planning commission and city council. But right now, the problem that I see that we're also solving is we have a whole section of commercial zone that allows 0 residential for the most part, and a residential zone that allows very little or no commercial. Like the two just don't. And I think that there is opportunity in some areas to say, well, let's listen, bring a proposal, and if this doesn't work for you, what does, and then just have that interchange. I haven't had a lot of those opportunities to say, what does the city want? Well, I have no idea. But why don't you come up with a proposal? And if it's at least a option as an overlay zone, and we do have those standards of we've said this is what we want, or this is what we want it to look like, then you have some, well, as long as the city gets this out of it, then it might go forward type of discussion, instead of like, right now, we're kind of held hostage by our own code, right? It's like, well, it's R15, so it is what it is, or it's commercial, it is what it is. So anyway, that's just kind of where I'm coming from.
But you hinted that there might even be development right now that would take place if that were available. Is that Fair statement.
Yeah, some proposals. It's calmed down a little bit. To be honest, a lot of those discussions had to do with ride systems and the trajectory that they were on. But the other thing is we do have a lot of local businesses expanding that are just fitting into wherever they can find. And some of the people operating businesses don't build buildings, right? And the people that are building buildings are like, well, I'll build it, but I want to know who I'm building for, and I want a long-term lease. So I'm saying all the elements are there, and we do have potential within growing our own economy, not necessarily recruiting, but we do have a growing economy and some businesses that are expanding and people that are not doing business in ideal space because that's not the business they're in the operating the business. So I do think that there's demand right now and some nice connections that could be made.
Yeah, therein is a problem that sounds like it may need to be solved that mixed use could help with. So I like that.
I think we've got two more comments pending. Mr. Ackett, your hand's up, and then let's go to Mr. Woods and make that three. We'll go to the end of the row.
Thank you. I think to that point, connecting a few comments about picking an area, maybe a half a block, whatever it is kind of a test. I think there are developers and builders right now that are so hungry and so starved for opportunity, and they watch the zoning and they know that opportunity, and they're looking for that opportunity. And if we were to make that opportunity available to where, a multifamily or a high density residential opportunity were available with requirements of commercial, I would hypothesize that the developers and the builders would come faster than we could imagine, and they would jump on those opportunities, and they would buy those homes and they would knock them down, and they would build multifamily with commercial, and they would be up before you knew it. And there would be new commercial buildings available for people, new businesses in wherever these zones were. And I don't think we're in a mode where it would be sit and wait anymore. I think there's enough hunger and lack of opportunity land-wise that I dare hypothesize that if we did that and we tried something like that strategically, we could maybe prove to ourselves, whether something like that were desirable or not, and how that played out for us. And I think it's a great play to how do you get more commercial? How do you get more commercial, in those zones if there's a resistance to the commercial? And, I think Ty kind of confirmed that a little bit. Like, if we make it so desirable for a developer or a builder that the math is correct on the residential side, the commercial, if we force the commercial, it will come.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. Let's go Wes and then Lance.
Well, I have to disagree with Jason completely. I'm looking at running a business and that needs foot traffic. And if you went to the bank, and I haven't done it, but you go to the bank and you say, I want to start a business in Morgan, Utah, and it's going to be in a new building. So the rent, you're going to charge somebody $2,500 to $3,500 a month. And you showed your banker that there's 4,000 people in Morgan and then some in the surroundings. The numbers for me, it just doesn't add up. It's just, it's got X amount of people. Now for a restaurant, okay, yeah, people will come for good meals, but, and I'm just throwing these things out here. I've seen over the years how many places have stayed vacant just on sheer location and accessibility and things like that. And for me, I would love to drive 2 blocks and go to open my store in Morgan, Utah. I would love it. I would go broke here. Just my business, what I do, it would be extremely hard. So I guess one of my points is even if we do the zoning and that, I don't think that there's just going to be an onslaught of people wanting to build down State Street and like, you know, really going, because there's just not the population around here to keep a business going. It's too expensive nowadays to do it. Just my thought on it.
Thank you, Wes. Appreciate that. Lance, your comment.
A lot of my thoughts on mixed use have kind of come from future and new stuff, and this State Street, I've kind of enjoyed this tonight thinking about this. One thing, when I think about the mixed use, I kind of quickly went down State Street, just clicking on my little map that shows the plats and looking at areas. There's a lot of little places where you have 2 homes between businesses. When you take those 2 homes, that's half acre of ground. In one instance, it's 2 acres of ground. It's 1.5 acres of ground. So as we talk about mixed use, I think part of this discussion would need to be on, I think Wes brought it up. We don't want the houses. Well, you know, one thing I know we've talked about is the parking and area. Well, if we're willing to, you know, change some frontages, are we going to let these businesses maybe build up to the sidewalk and you push the parking in back? You do some of those things. Maybe they'll actually look at it and say, okay, this lot this house is on, I don't have room for a business now, but if I can take this lot and I'm going to do mixed use, it changes my frontage. I can move the building forward. I can actually pick up some usable space for parking. Maybe that could change some things to where someone's going to look at a couple of these older homes and say, I can pick up half an acre here. I can lay it out a little different than maybe what we would allow now. And I can make something work. Someone had made the comment, and this is one thing I've kind of found myself as a member of the commission and then also being employed by the city. Someone made the comment, I think, are we ready for this? And I think whether we're ready for it or not, it's something we definitely need to start looking at and trying to put a plan together for it, because someone's going to come in and want to do it and we're not going to be ready and we're not going to have anything in place. And I've seen several times where I wish I could have saw 6 months to the future, and maybe we could have made something better than what it turned out to be if we had just, I'm convinced there's things that take 20 years to make happen. So we just well start the 20 years now as started in 20 years. But I really love whoever said the live, work, shop, play. I think that's important here. And I think I would echo Ty. I think a lot of this stuff's going to come a lot quicker than we would like or think.
Mr. London, please.
This is just a question I have, and it goes back to what Dave mentioned. Is what was it, South Dakota, North Dakota example? And then Lance made me think of this. If it was designated mixed use along State Street, hypothetically, and in Lance's example, somebody comes in and buys a couple of homes, could they just go ahead and build a residential home there with no business?
Potentially, it just depends on how we write the ordinance. So if it's designated mixed use, we could state in the ordinance that it's required unless.
There's no audio.
Thank you. It's got to happen to everybody sometime, right? Turn on your audio.
Thank you.
Basically, you could write in the ordinance that to opt out of the residential, or excuse me, to opt out of the commercial and just have residential, we would have to have a economic analysis showing that there's not a need or a desire for the commercial. So you also could just say residential component is fine and we encourage commercial. There's a varying degrees that we could establish. And there could be multiple different types of mixed use that focuses on different levels of that as well. So I guess the answer is a variety, but it's how we want to see it.
Yeah, because in the one scenario, you're almost defeating your purpose if they're just gonna come in there and buy a great big lot and put a residential home on it. So it's just a question. So we could pretty much state or design it the way we wanted to design it, or.
Yeah. And the hard part about that is just that every property is going to be different. And so once we write the ordinance and get something in place, something is going to come up and we're going to say, we wish it was a little different. And so it probably will take some fine tuning.
Thanks. Thank you.
So just to try to organize a couple of the thoughts that we're hearing throughout the evening as we have this discussion as preparation towards trying to put this into some type of ordinance that can help make our city what we want it to be. Just in simple terms, I'm thinking the why, the where, and the what. The why is, as David mentioned, and why are we doing this? Are we ready? Is the timing right? Being very clear on what we're trying to accomplish with that and knowing the why. I think that's going to make us stay principled in how we make decisions on which pieces of ordinance we want and which we don't. The where is one of the things we haven't gone into a lot, but we did touch a little bit tonight with respect to the areas within our city today that this might be appropriate. State Street, Commercial Street, across from Riverside Park, the new areas that were outlined, as the resort district or riverfront properties, in some future state. There's a lot that we can think about with the why, or excuse me, the where, and we can work that out. And then it's the what. What does the ordinance actually consist of? And we haven't gotten into a lot of the parameters and the language, but as we can see from the extra 40 pages we have in this packet for 4 jurisdictions, it's about 10 pages of ordinance each. So this is a fairly involved thing, whatever we choose and start to put forward. And I think it makes a lot of sense for us to dig into that even more, those examples and or others that you may come across, and identify and highlight the parts of that code that resonates, that you feel is the type of feel that may be something that we can start to craft and put together a straw man of a ordinance that we can start to think about and debate more, sophisticatedly. But that's kind of what I'm thinking as I see where this discussion's gone, is being clear on those things, the why, the where, and the what. And we haven't answered all that tonight. And I'm not necessarily wrapping up, although it's been an hour and a half. That to me is part of what I'm thinking of as far as next steps, is clarifying each of those pieces so that they can start to turn into something tangible.
Can I add something on the where? So one where that hasn't been mentioned is down Young Street across from the Plex. That's an area that I think about a lot as we're putting a bridge in, because it's all zoned residential. And I'm not sure that, maybe that's what we want. I don't know, but there's opportunity right next to ball fields and large crowds and gatherings. And there's 24 acres or so. Anyway, also vacant. So whatever we do zone, a lot of that's vacant, right? So that's an opportunity, I think, for whatever it is we come up with mixed zone, to maybe where it's new and not so much how are we going to transition from what's always been there to one thing or another. I'm not advocating. It's just one of those questions. I think that after that bridge comes up, that's aware that we've talked a lot about other parts of the city, but I've never heard any discussions about that section and how it ties back into Commercial Street. So kind of makes a nice loop up State Street over to Young Street and back around.
It's a good call out. Thank you. I made note of that as well. Mr. Hopkin.
One other thing to add to that, Ty, I was really surprised to see the maps. And I have no idea what the city or the county is thinking, but did I not see the possibility of including the old Como area into the city?
So that,
And if that was what I interpreted it to be, and that is what they meant in their presentation, what you just said fits into this.
yeah, so we've actually been, that Como approached the city about that, but we don't have a zone for that. We don't have a zone at all that would recognize anything that, as far as I understand, of what Como is trying to do, right? Like tent sites and recreation. We don't have a recreation zone, but the city or the county didn't write that into the proposal. That's just the feedback we got from the contractor. So
Well,
far,
if
what
that
they're
old,
working on it.
if that old pool was there today, I'd have been in it.
Yeah, but they are looking at, hey, that is touching the city, services are available, and then over by the pickleball courts and everything else, making more of a regional park. I think what they're just calling out there is that where services are available, it makes sense to put your arms around it as a city. We just, but again, we don't necessarily, other than public space where we can make parks and do what we want, we don't really have anything that would accommodate what's going on there. We don't accommodate gravel roads and RV parks, temporary, that sort of thing. So I don't know if it should or shouldn't be, but currently we would have to contemplate what they're meaning by recreation zone as well.
So I'd like to, at this point, just collect anyone's final closing comments for the evening. And we'll regroup, organize some of these thoughts that have come together. And I'd like to take this into, continue this. Obviously, it's an ongoing effort. Take this into our work session next month, and or our formal agenda. But I'd like to, I think, do a work session where we can dig a little deeper into some of these. So if we can do that, but I do see another hand. Jason, go ahead.
Okay, my final comments would just be right in line with Ty, and I walk a lot. I get out and walk around the city a lot, kind of like Tony does. And one night I was on the Mickelson Mile and just happened to run into that gal that owns that property you were talking about. She was raised in that white house, and I think over time that land came down to her through her family. And we were chatting about that land, and she was totally she was not adverse to developing that land, but she expressed to me the reason why it hadn't been developed was because the zoning was adverse enough that, numbers didn't make sense and things like that. But she did express that if the zoning ever changed and if it were more favorable for development and things like that, that she'd be more interested in that type of thing. So the fact that you brought that up and that bridge is going in, I got the same feeling from her that could be an ideal situation right there, that piece of property for kind of what we're talking about. And she seemed to express the same. And it just seemed like our codes were enough adverse that the reason why something hadn't been done is because it just weren't, friendly for that type of situation. So.
And thank you, Jason. Jim, see your hand up.
Yeah, some of us were on the planning commission when that property was attempted to be developed, and there was a lot of problems with the sewer. That's the thing that the people are from the 20,000-foot view are not looking at: usability, flood zone, lift stations for sewers, et cetera, et cetera. Because I remember we had months and months of discussion on that property, and that's why it's not developed now. And I don't know what's changed in the elevation, but something to think about. And then the other thing is, I thought we this discussion started off with a mixed use building. So now it's evolved to a mixed use neighborhood. Is that my understanding?
Not intentionally. If that, I think the conversation can include
I mean,
both.
because somebody said a warehouse. Well, are they going to build apartments on the second and third floors? I mean, that was the whole vision when we started this, was to have a mixed use building, not a mixed use neighborhood where you could have 85% residential and throw in a store just to accommodate. That wasn't the original intent, but I guess that's where it's evolved, and I guess that's where people want to take it. I don't know, but just kind of interesting sitting back and listening tonight. Thanks.
Thanks for that. So part of the note that I'm adding there is scope, making sure we're clear on the scope of what we're trying to solve for within the why, where, what. Other final comments? But before adjourning, I just want to add one thing. And it's something I'm thinking about for, work session type of topics. So Teresa, there's three things that have been on my mind, and one is a can of worms, but I'm still interested in looking at it at some point. And that's digging back up the fence ordinance. Particularly my interest is with corner properties. I want to re-examine that. The second one is subdivisions and access points with two formal points of entry as opposed to one formal point of entry and one emergency entry. We talked about codifying that, and I was reading over some previous minutes and we never went back to it. So I don't want to lose that one. And then the third one is, understanding maybe if we can do some problem solving with respect to RVs, line of sight, street parking, storage, whatever that entails. But those are three things that have been on my mind as I've been trying to be more observant in the community. That being said, we did have a motion to adjourn, and we'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
I know, but I also like How are you? You're pretty quiet tonight. Yeah. I am. I have a lot of different thoughts. Well, I thought that's what we are. I'm sorry. Thanks for your comments. Sir, yes, I just slowed down. How's the old home doing? Pardon? How's the old home doing? The old home? That's slow. I like it. Well. what I'm told. Well, that's one thing I can honestly say is, I would never come on board with an axe to grind.
If that was the